Welcome. Happy Repeal Day, all. My name is Kirsten Tynan. I'm Executive Director of the Fully Informed Jury Association. And with me today is FIJA Vice Chair, Robert Anthony Peters. Welcome, Robert, and thanks for joining me, especially on last minute notice. All right, today we've got three little segments of our short presentation. Apologies for getting started a little late, but we're going to keep it to just about a half hour, maybe slightly less. We're going to start off sharing some of the research results from digging into the history of the Prohibition era and jury outcomes. So you may have heard some stories I've told before, but I believe you'll find all or most of these are new. And Robert and I are just going to go back and forth. So I'll get us started with a story reported in the New York Times on the 30th of May 1925. So recall that Prohibition started in 1919, I believe, and they were talking about a grand jury in Philadelphia that refused to return indictments in many liquor cases because, quote, its members did not believe in the liquor laws, end quote. And that was explicitly stated by the jury foreman in the jury's final report to the judge. According to the New York Times, the judge hotly denounced these jurors and told them they had not done their duty, but we certainly disagree. We think they did a great job. And the funny part for me, he dismissed them without thanking them for their service. Robert, I wonder if they could have survived such a slight. What do you think?
Oh, that must have broke their hearts. It does seem as if they did not give a fig for the judge's approval or anybody else's approval. They were going to vote their conscience, period. So
awesome.
Well done. Well done.
Why don't you share one of the ones on your list with us?
Yeah, there's a case from 1922. This is out of the New York Times, and the article is titled "Substitute Jury Frees Cafe Owner." So I'm sure the prosecution felt they had just a Loctite case. They had evidence of, what better evidence could you have than federal prohibition agents walking into a cafe and ordering a drink and imbibing? This was a slam dunk for them. Well, they seat one jury, and then upon questioning by the judge, they admitted that they were opposed to the Volstead Act. So immediately they were dismissed. They called 12 more jurors in, and they seemed to be satisfactory. And then the prosecution calls the witnesses, the agents, who say, hey, we went in, we asked for drinks. This cafe owner sold it to us. And cafe owner takes a stand and says, I did not sell these agents any drinks. And the jury spent only a few minutes deliberating before they came back with a full not guilty verdict for the cafe owner.
Those ones crack me up. It's like a little extra slap of the face when it's like, we spent a few minutes on it. we didn't really worry about it.
you could imagine them in there, maybe they pulled out the racing forum, or, we're talking about the latest baseball game, or maybe the Charlie Chaplin film they were hoping to catch.
Right.
But and this was early on during Prohibition as well. This was only a few years into it, and so it's fascinating to see that that early on, people already had made up their mind that this law was ridiculous and untenable.
Yeah. One thing I'm really looking forward to doing is when I get enough articles to organize them into a timeline, so we can kind of see how jury responses and how judges and prosecutors and all these things kind of evolved through the era. It's really going to be interesting, I think, to see how that changes by the end of the era. The next article I have actually is from close to the end of the, well, closer to the end of the era. This is from 23rd of July, 1929, also from the New York Times. This article is titled and subtitled, Jurors Dismissed from Liquor Trial. Philadelphia Safety Director accuses them of ignoring indictments. One had pint of liquor. What could be going on here? Well, these two members of the grand jury, and pay attention to the last names here, because we might detect a slight ethnic tinge that you and I are familiar with. The two jurors dismissed were Ira L. Brown and Charles Tierney. I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong, Robert, but is Tierney not an Irish surname?
I would say there's a good possibility of that.
I was thinking that my own self. Well, they were dismissed from this grand jury after basically the grand jury was like no billing a lot of liquor indictments. And of course, that ticked off the government. So what's going on here? Well, Juror Brown happened to be arrested in the midst of this on a Saturday morning as he was leaving a speakeasy with a pint of liquor in his pocket. No wonder he wasn't busy enforcing the laws. The other, Mr. Tierney, was dismissed after police did a little digging in his background, and it turned out he had a police record with a number of liquor law violation arrests, and it says for reckless operation of automobiles. So I don't know if that sounds like more than one reckless operation of automobiles. So there you have two jurors who, of course, are protecting other people the way they would themselves want to be protected. And as soon as they were gotten rid of, the judge turns to the rest of the jury and basically suggests that we're going to forget about what you were doing in the past, but I expect you to start performing your duty. And promptly they returned 8 indictments in the next hour for liquor law violations. Oh, within an hour and a half. So really, basically, they got rid of the hero jurors and the others folded. So a little disappointed with them. But these people who are, of course, painted by the government as horrible individuals, to me, those were the ones who were actually doing their duty.
Absolutely. Thank goodness we've got hero jurors out there.
All right. You're up next, Robert.
All right. This was an article from a little bit later on in 1929, January of 1929, again from the New York Times. And this was about a grand jury. Actually, I'm sorry, this one was from 1921, about a grand jury in Brooklyn that threw out 76 cases out of 98 that were alleging violation of the dry laws. Basically, they were refusing to indict in cases where, quote, liquor has been carried in flasks or bottles for personal use. After 5 successive petty juries had acquitted defendants under the Dry Act, it was considered mistaken policy to indict, except where the evidence was strong. So not only did they have to really, they felt they needed to go, stick only with cases that were strongest, but also ones that weren't involving just mere personal use. And it's interesting to see the parallels, right, that we have with the drug war, where you've got people today who when they are seeing these violations where it's just somebody with a personal use of substance, a lot of times juries are acquitting based on that if it's not for a variety of reasons, but especially if it's not with intent to distribute even.
Yeah.
So
it's
that's
definitely
been kind of a long tradition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see that jurors can identify sort of gradations of seriousness of offenses, whereas you'll find, I think in Pima County a couple years ago, you had a grand jury known as the Notorious 269th because they were throwing out indictments for drugs that were being charged as felony offenses for tiny amounts of drugs. And I think one of them actually did the math, and it turned out that when they looked at all these felony level charges they were being asked to charge people with, and felonies mess up your life well beyond when you get out of prison. But
Sure.
it was the average amount of drugs involved was less than a half a packet of sugar, and they wanted to call those felonies. So it's great to see jurors have long understood this idea that not everything is the worst crime possible.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see both in this article and the one in Pima County, my home county, that those are grand juries, because grand juries are kind of have a reputation for just rubber stamping what the prosecution will present before them. Just kind of, well, I guess, we'll just let it go to trial and let a jury decide from there. So it's interesting when the citizens are like, no, we've had enough with these ridiculous laws, and it's time that we decide, even way back at this level, that this shouldn't even be something that should be pursued.
Yeah.
And as we saw, it kind of went this from 1921 when the grand jury was deciding based on just on personal use, but then as these things go to trial, like in the cafe owner in that case in 1922, even though he was distributing or selling it, vending it, they were finding him not guilty. So, that could have been one of those cases that, okay, this did go to trial, but when it got there, that jury was like, yeah, no, even though it wasn't just for personal use, this is still a stupid law.
And these guys said they were asked for it.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, this is the American way.
It's not like he slipped it into their punch bowl or something.
Yeah, right. Like all those threats we hear about all the children who are going to be fed drugs on Halloween. And it's like, don't you realize these things cost money?
Not familiar with economics, are they?
Yeah.
All right, my last article, I saved this one because this is such a fun category of hero juror stories for me. I used to tell one story over and over about George Bevan, whose jurors were called on the carpet after they drank up all the liquor in his case and then found they had no evidence and had to acquit him. Well, there turns out to be quite a number of cases in Prohibition era history where jurors felt they had to not just sniff, but outright sample the evidence. And this story, published on December 30th, 1924 in the New York Times, is of a case in San Juan, Puerto Rico. It's entitled "Jury Sips Too Much Evidence. Liquor Case Ends in Mistrial." Now, these folks did not get the job done, but I think they did a pretty good job trying to do that. Perhaps the amount of liquor they had imbibed made them less effective at the critical moment, but let's see what happened. Well, a federal judge ended up, when they came back and said, we have a verdict, he declared a mistrial because they had sent a quart jar of liquid into the jury room with them. And apparently it was drawn down 5 inches by the time it came back. It had been almost full. And the judge, it says in the article, thought that, quote, 5 inches of liquor in a quart bottle is too much for 12 jurors to consume in determining whether the evidence contains more than 0.5% alcohol. So it sounds from the article like before they could actually deliver the verdict, which one assumes he knew was not going to go the way he wanted, he quickly dismissed them and it was a mistrial. Moreover, if only 5 inches was gone, that sounds like there is still liquid left in there, which means they kind of left the door open for a retrial. But according to the article, when the verdict was handed in, the bottle was, oh no, it says it was empty. Oh, good. Good job. I hadn't read it very well. It says the bottle was empty and the courtroom was found in great disorder. So perhaps they did get the job done. Maybe I misunderstood it. I was thinking it wasn't empty and it might have opened the door for a retrial. But good job, San Juan, Puerto Rico jurors in 1924.
Well, you can tell the judge was a man because he thought 5 inches was too much. So,
all right. Thank you. Yeah, one more story, Robert. I'm going to turn you loose to share that one, and then we'll talk a little Spooner.
Well, yeah, we've got one. This was a little bit. This was the one in 1929 that the federal government announced it was dropping 30 conspiracy charges against nightclub owners and would stop using this as a tactic to try to enforce prohibition because 3 trial juries had refused to convict on serious charges. So this is one of those things that, again, we see this practice carried forward, right? Where, well, if we can't convict them on the crime that we want to, then we will seek to convict them on something else. In this case, they were charged with conspiracy. But fortunately, the juries were too smart for that, and again, this is where the heroes of the juries are what we depend on to safeguard our freedom.
Mm-hmm. And I think it definitely shows how your actions in one situation, be it on a grand jury or a trial jury, don't affect just those cases, but send over time, as a pattern builds, that sends a message back to police and prosecutors about what they might as well bother with, because why bother arresting people for a bunch of things that no one's ever going to get convicted on? And in turn, really influences legislation, as we saw with the repeal of prohibition.
Yeah.
All right. So one thing that I learned this year was related to Lysander Spooner's essay, Vices Are Not Crimes, A Vindication of Moral Liberty, which we have on the FIJA website. Robert, I wonder if you just get us started on this topic by giving a few comments on what Spooner says is the difference between vices on the one hand and crimes on the other.
Yeah, it's an important distinction, and I'll read Spooner's words and then talk about it for a second. In Spooner's words, vices are those acts by which a man harms himself or his property. Crimes are those acts by which one man harms the person or property of another. Vices are simply the errors which a man makes in his search after his own happiness. Unlike crimes, they imply no malice toward others and no interference with their persons or property. In vice, the very essence of crime, that is, the design to injure the person or property of another, is wanting. So we usually talk about this in terms of consent, right? So a crime is committed, not in the legislative sense necessarily, but in the moral sense. A crime would be committed when you've been aggressed upon, when somebody has fraudulently deceived you of something, has stolen from you, has assaulted you in some fashion. Whereas vice is merely something that you have done that has affected yourself, whether it's a dissipation of your health or your treasure. This is something that we tend to, in our own lives, see as hopefully a forgivable mistake that we or our friends or family make. Whereas crimes are something that is often tougher for us to forgive because there has been a harm to somebody else other than the person involved, or other than strictly the person involved. There's I'm thinking of Peter McWilliams' book, Ain't Nobody's Business If You Do, I believe is the name of it.
Yes.
And it's the history of consent. I think he calls it the absurd history of consensual crimes or something along those lines. And I think that's kind of like a casual way of providing the distinction here. Ain't nobody's business if you do. If I want to, eat magic mushrooms and smoke, it may not be the best idea. It might not be a good health outcome. I don't know. But, if I'm doing these things and it merely affects myself, then that would be considered in the vice category as opposed to the crime. We can see if I go and break into Kirsten's car and rob her of her possessions there, that's clearly a crime. I've I've caused hurt to another person. But if I'm just staying in and ordering Uber Eats because I got way too high, the only person I probably hurt is myself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great explanation. And basically, everything you just said is why, early on when I had just, read it, I thought, oh, this must be related to Essay on the Trial by Jury, which is his work explaining about jury nullification. But I was looking into it to see, what its relationship was and what its position in his history was. And it turns out that the Essay on the Trial by Jury was published in 1850, but Vices Are Not Crimes wasn't published until much, much later in 1875. So what the heck, what's going on? Well, it's an argument against alcohol prohibition that first appeared without attribution to Spooner in a book by a man whose name I think is pronounced Dio Lewis, Dio being short for Diocletian. So I think it's Dio, not Dio, but I could be wrong. It's D-I-O. And that book was entitled Prohibition of Failure, or the True Solution of the Temperance Question. And obviously in 1875, this is well before federal prohibition, but the temperance movement was already in quite a bit of bloom, I guess you'd say, at that point. And how do we know that this was Spooner's? Well, it turns out that a man named Benjamin Tucker, who is a close friend of Spooner, wrote about this in his obituary for Spooner that he published in his periodical that he published called Liberty. I think it was a magazine. But he identified Spooner as the author of Vices Are Not Crimes. Now, what is this work, Prohibition of Failure? What is it all about? Well, it preached extensively against the evils of alcohol, which you'd think would mean, oh, this person is for cracking down on it left and right. But no, even though Dio Lewis considered alcohol a poison, he strongly defended the legality of the production, sale, and consumption of alcohol. He felt that the temperance movement had to be completely voluntary. Now, published, of course, as it was in 1875, it doesn't tie specifically to the era of federal prohibition. But between Spooner's Essay on the Trial by Jury and the later work, Vices Are Not Crimes, you can see how Spooner laid much philosophical groundwork that helped turn things around as far as personal choice regarding the consumption of alcohol in that era between the ratification of the 18th Amendment in 1919 to the ratification of the 21st in 1933. I'm going to get a quick sip of water before we wrap it up tonight. All right. Any thoughts on that history at all before we move on to the toast, Robert?
It was a great discovery. I hadn't heard that before, and that's a great something definitely to be mined for more material for sure.
Yeah. What were your thoughts on what was sort of the significance of Vices Are Not Crimes before, or did you just not really have any context for that?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it in the timeline in terms of Spooner's writing before. You just kind of that's the weird thing about kind of coming across some of these people much later. You just this is their body of work. I know with Adam Smith, it's kind of the curiosity of people are like, well, so he wrote Theory of Moral Sentiments first, and then he wrote The Wealth of Nations, and what does that mean? And it's interesting to think about when people produce the works that they do, and how the discovery process during one book might influence another, or one set of writing influence another. But yeah, I know Spooner had maybe he was saving up some things for later in life, or just it was assumed, right? I mean, sometimes that's it, right? Like these opinions are assumed, or these beliefs are assumed until you realize at some point, maybe I need to make this clear. And it wasn't until that he saw the threat to to vice that he said, okay, now it's time to speak.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to hopefully dig into that a bit more and kind of get more of the context of how he moved from the various things he wrote regarding juries and victimless offenses and how they all tie together.
Yeah.
All right. Now for our big repeal day toast.
Yeah.
As we close this evening's short program, I would like to propose a toast. We are celebrating today a gift that was given to us in no small part by many mostly unknown jurors in the Prohibition era who protected their neighbor's life, liberty, and property. I think we ought to take a moment to appreciate that they pulled off one of those all too rare feats of helping to take back from government a significant chunk of liberty that was stolen from them and could have been lost to us. Not all of it, as those of you of certain ages and who live in certain locations know, but indeed a good bit of that liberty they did get back, and we enjoy that today. Without these jurors, we might not be able to do what we are here to do today. So as far as it is legal where you are, please join me in toasting these hero jurors with the beverage of your choice and not the government's. To the heroes of the Prohibition era, with our thanks.
Cheers.
I had to refill mine because I have to admit I was sipping a little bit before we even started.
Well done. Well done.
Robert, any final thoughts before we close?
Just to say, yeah, to express our gratitude to the brave jurors of yesteryear and of today, and to some point when we will be toasting to the repeal of many more prohibitions that we currently experience. And I look forward to that when people are free to make their choices without fear of at least state reprisal. And the only fear they have to have is of the consequences of our own decisions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We hope that some of the stories and other information we shared here tonight inspire you when you are called to serve as a juror, to do your best to protect your neighbors, just as these jurors protected theirs. Happy Repeal Day to all from the Fully Informed Jury Association. Take care and good night.